There have been a lot of big franchises that have held high spots in my gaming pantheon over the years. Metroid, Halo, Pikmin, Doom, Mario Kart, XCOM. Some of my favorite games of all time come from those. And yet at one point or another, every one of them have disappointed me. Sure, there's indie franchises that have maintained my love, but when talking about big names from big companies, whether it's an old entry I don't like, a weird new change to the formula, a complete disappearance, or a new game that just doesn't work for me, they have all let me down in one way or another. And yet there is one franchise that I believe, beyond reason, will never let me down and still excites me no matter what. This is the gaming series that has been with me the longest and has never let me down. Maybe I don't always get the newcomer I want or think the game has faults, but with Masahiro Sakurai at the helm, you can be sure it's made with the utmost love and attention to detail. And wouldn't you know it, with a new Nintendo console and soon to be 5 years since the end of Smash Ultimate's DLC, it's just about time for another. I feel like this is one of the franchises that everyone is on the lookout for, and it certainly has inspired plenty of discussion and speculation already. However, I am not here for speculation or imagination. This is foresight. I will be correct about something this time. Every word I speak is truth rendered by God himself, and all others will bow. Please note, I do not actually think that my ideas are fact or look down upon others' ideas for the next Smash. This is a joke. But seriously, I'm not just doing this to talk about what route I think is most likely for the franchise. I want to cover what I consider to be every route, every angle they might take when making this next entry in one of gaming's biggest names. I'll be going over safe assumptions, bold predictions, and out there concepts. Besides, the way this stuff usually works, I'll guess everything but what actually happens, so just use this video as negative confirmation. Is that what that means? Before we kick this off though, one more thing I do want to say is this. A lot of people have already put their thoughts out about this, a lot of people have similar opinions, and a lot of those shared opinions are gonna show up here. This time around, with Ultimate's massive impression, it does kind of feel like everyone agrees on a couple main paths we could find ourselves on. So if anything I say echoes someone else, I swear I've just come to the same conclusion on my own. And either way, even if half of my ideas will sound somewhat familiar, the back half, well, they're gonna have me looking like... Anyway, enough build up, let's get into it. In my opinion, there are three major directions they could take with Smash, each having two approaches. We're gonna go from the safest to the total shakeups. Up first, we have... The simplest solution is most often the correct one. Smash is nothing if not a series that builds upon itself. Melee, an improved version of the original, Brawl expanding single-player offerings and ways to play, Smash 4 diversifying platforms and amplifying big crossovers with elaborate trailers, and Ultimate acting as a summation of the series so far while further upping its reputation as king of gaming crossovers. While a new entry continuing to build is statedly not going to happen, and is frankly impossible, there's no reason they would change the general concept of what new Smash means. In this route, we assume that Smash uses the framework available to create a new yet familiar experience. I'm going to get the first approach out of the way now because it's one that everyone has brought up at this point and that I honestly find the least exciting. Everyone, including Sakurai, understands that you don't top Ultimate in terms of its roster. Whether it's development time, altering movesets, legal matters, monetization, we can't get a new game with everyone is here again. For many players, myself included, the idea of sticking to the same roster while limiting how much new content and changes can be made is underwhelming. But for those who favor roster size above all else, they would argue, why make a new game when you can add on to what's already there? That's where Super Smash Bros. Ultimate Nintendo Switch 2 Edition comes in. Following the fairly consistent trend of Switch 2 editions already established, Nintendo and Sakurai could opt to forego a dedicated new entry for the Switch 2, at least at this time, in favor of continued development and DLC for Smash Ultimate. In terms of what we'd get, I'm sure there'd be performance enhancements and maybe game chat features or something, but that's not what we're here for. What new content could be added with Ultimate Switch 2 Edition? The most obvious draw to get people to put money down on this would be new fighters. I don't think they'd lay out a massive roadmap for this, so I think what we'd get would essentially be a beefy Fighters Pass that lessens the amount of additional content coming into the game. In my mind, this would be a selection of mostly first-party characters that fill the gap missteps of Nintendo's last few years, along with a new third-party partnership. Any characters coming from repeat franchises wouldn't get stages or isolated spirit boards, while total newcomers would get a stage and maybe some spirits added in with the usual fanfare. Introducing the Fighters Pass Volume 3 Newcomers. Will come later. See, with the way this breakdown is going to go, I'm inevitably going to talk about the same characters across various outcomes for New Smash. There are characters that I think are highly likely across the Switch 2 edition, standard sequel, or more intense alteration. So any talk of specific newcomers will come in one big batch later after discussing my strongest predictions. I'm not even going to timestamp it. That's how I get you to watch more of the video. So if we're not talking newcomers here, what else could there be? I think if Sakurai was to return to Ultimate, he would have the advantage of so much work already being done on an incredible foundation, so he would want to add something worthwhile along with characters. Although this is not my personal favorite direction for Smash, I will admit that Sakurai doing something new and cool by using Ultimate as a base is a rare opportunity that is worth taking on. On a smaller note, something a lot of fans have wanted to see return is Break the Targets. I would love this. With how many fighters there are, it would most likely work like Brawl, with levels of difficulty rather than bespoke individual challenges, or maybe a couple set environments with their own difficulty levels or something, emphasizing speed, aerial movement, range, and so on. I think getting Break the Targets in any way would be great, but the thing I'd want to see the most is a target builder mode, allowing for user-generated stages. This would really allow players to go nuts and make awesome, difficult courses for specific fighters, as well as create an endless pool of content. It's a good idea for us and the dev team's sanity. A rare win-win. Beyond that, I think the main other addition we could see would be a new single-player mode. Again, with so many characters that already have their own classic modes, something tailored to each fighter would be impractical. You need a mode that's flexible, highlights the gameplay, and offers something Ultimate doesn't. It's time for Smash to dip its toes into the waters of roguelike. Luckily for us, we already have plenty to go off from Sakurai's other games. Could we see a blend of adventure mode and Hades, moving through procedurally generated rooms with constant gameplay? Or could we see something like Air Rider's Road Trip? That mode already kind of feels like a roguelike, even though it's not. And I think picking your path through various special fights and bosses on the way to the big bad would work equally well in Smash. If I had to say which approach is more likely, I'd say the latter. Less assets to make. As for theming and bosses, I'm calling this mode Shattered Space. To truly make this Ultimate, let's bring back elements of Subspace Emissary. Taboo's back, and he's pissed off. To justify the randomness of the roguelike format, you'd be traveling through some dangerous new form of subspace to stop Taboo from re-emerging as a threat. A new, even scarier version of the Smash OC would be the final boss. Along the way, you could easily reuse bosses already present in Ultimate, but I think it'd be really fun to introduce a whole new wave of bosses. Since we're not getting a ton of new fighters, this would be a really exciting way to still introduce new characters and franchises to the game. And hopefully that would finally make them give us Boss Rush too. With Fighters Pass Volume 3, Break the Targets, Boss Rush, and Shattered Space, Ultimate Switch 2 Edition would be well worth the money, and I'd be more than happy to have that as our new Smash content. Like I said though, this is not my first choice. If doing this means delaying a brand new entry to the Smash series, especially if it means losing Sakurai's direction for the next full game, then I'd really rather them not try to milk a few extra dollars out of Ultimate. I'm perfectly happy with Ultimate as is. Sure, the idea of more characters is always fun, especially if it means newcomers I'm really connected to. But there's nothing wrong with Ultimate being a snapshot of a moment in time. It perfectly highlights the franchises up to that point as well as the fanbase at that moment, bringing in long-time requests and giant faces of the industry. For me and a lot of other players, seeing Smash focus on the new rather than the old is the ideal. So, no more DLC, no more updates, let's talk about our other approach. This to me is the definition of simplest solution. If the next thing Sakurai does is a new Smash, it's gonna be a new Smash, just like every entry before it. We won't get every fighter back, whether that be due to negotiations, relevancy, or just making room for newcomers, though some fighters could return later like in Smash 4. In this video, I'm really not going to worry about updates or DLC fighters though. If I'm talking about a character, either assume I mean base game or am just generally speaking about the game as a complete product down the line. Along with new fighters, we'll get tweaks to movesets and maybe mechanics, new stages and forms of representation, representation, and new modes. Let's run down that list, of course skipping newcomers until later. Under this approach, I think we'll finally get some revamped movesets, making sure returning vets feel fresh and up to date. However, as this game would still have a pretty sizable roster, and realistically some characters are perfectly fine as is, this wouldn't be some grand overhaul. Some characters would be more or less untouched, and some would only receive minor updates like functionality changes or a new move or two. As for the ones that I think would get more focus, here's a rundown. As an original 12 fighter and a face of Nintendo, Mario could use an update. A lot of his moves are fine, but a lot are dated and overly specific. Giving him something more representative of Mario as a whole would go a long way. Likewise, it's time to give Luigi his own personality, and the personality he actually has now, not just like weird brother. Get Luigi's Mansion in there. Maybe branch into the side series a little. On the whole, you can have him kinda still be like Mario, but at this point he doesn't need to. The Mushroom Kingdom needs even more though. Expanding Peach to encapsulate more games and appearances would be great, and Bowser really needs an overhaul. He's still some weird monster kaiju moveset based on old games and doesn't embody who Bowser is currently. Similarly, Donkey Kong has moved far beyond being a big bruiser moveset that Smash 64 needed. Both these characters deserve glow-ups in both their movesets and personality. I also think we need to look at the entire cast of Legend of Zelda, specifically the Triforce Trio. Sure, Ganondorf is a character that nearly everyone agrees deserves to get remade, but there's a lot to consider when it comes to Link and Zelda. There's plenty more that could be covered by movesets, and we need to decide what aspects of the franchise they should represent, one game versus total encapsulation. I think Smash 6 will absolutely be looking into these three. Beyond those staples though, I think you could get away with a lot staying the same. My final three considerations are less so about keeping up with franchises. Isabelle should be even less like Villager, Little Mac deserves to not suck, and Steve should be less broken. At least with those last two, I don't think anyone would fight me on that. And naturally, beyond fighters, one of the biggest ways to shake Smash up is in the new modes. Everything I said about Switch 2 Edition could absolutely be here. I'd love for even more stadium challenges to join Break the Targets, whether that's returning or new. And a roguelike mode still feels like something that would work really well in Smash, especially with a larger roster in order to avoid too much complication. So let's add more complication now. When you hear about what people want out of a new Smash, so many players will tell you that they miss something like Subspace Emissary. Regardless of gameplay, it was really a high point to see all the characters interacting in really cool, unique ways in this weird joint Smash world. However, many players like myself would also point out that Subspace just can't really work with this larger roster. Any sense of continuity or cohesion would be out the window, and it'd be far too much work on the dev side of things. Besides, a big problem with a mode like that returning is that Sakurai didn't like that cutscenes were immediately online in full without playing the game or proper context. It's basically why the fancy newcomer trailers came to be, and those aren't going anywhere anytime soon. If Sakurai were to have a change of heart though, here's how I think it'd work. Along with Classic Stadium and Shattered Space, a large-scale adventure mode would return to Smash. In order to limit character interactions while still incorporating them, my idea is that you would build a team, and those characters would be the main ones used in the story, with certain cutscenes made for specific characters that will be worked into gameplay depending on some kind of randomization or priority. You'd get the feeling of the interaction and still get cool moments, but like Subspace that would only have to swap cutscenes or characters out here and there. Maybe there could be specific campaigns so that you unlock certain characters in each story as well, to further break things up a bit. Something like that would probably elicit the same hype as Subspace while being practical to create. But naturally, Smash needs other new offerings outside of single player. For one, we need some new form of additional representation, assuming spirits were just for Ultimate. Again, with the scope of Smash now, I don't think we'll get trophies back, and I think the 2D artwork is likely to return, but we'll have to see what form that takes. On a larger scale, much like Squad Strike, I think it's time for a new mode and mechanic. This could be an opportunity to bring in full-on tag team fights. In this mode, you pick a small number of fighters and can swap them at will during a match. If they really leaned into this, you could have them able to activate for little assist attacks or buffs when not in use. Come to think of it, this would pair perfectly with that abbreviated adventure mode and its minimized team. So that's what my traditional Smash 6 looks like. Emphasis on returning characters with varying degrees of moveset alterations, a new adventure mode spiritually following in Subspace's footsteps, expanded single player, and an emphasis on tag team fighting. Wait, I'm missing something here, right? I thought I mentioned something else. You'll still have to wait a little longer for newcomer talk. In the meantime, let's cover something else that gives us interesting new representation in Smash: stages. Just like fighters, we'll definitely be paring down stages in any new version of Smash. Still, I think we can expect a lot, both in returning stages and an actual substantial amount of new ones, compared to Ultimate's meager offerings pre-DLC. In actuality, with how much has happened in Nintendo since Ultimate's release, stages are one of the premier ways to catch up on spotlights for quality games, so I'm hoping we can look forward to some really cool stuff. Anyway, here's how this will work. I want to cover stages I think will be returning for each franchise, new stages for each franchise in the traditional route of a sequel, and a few new stages that are a little less likely but are still fun ideas. There are some stages that may be added or be cut based on roster choices. We'll get to those when I cover the fighters. Starting with our returning stages, let's look at Smash itself. We'll obviously get new versions of Battlefield and Final Destination. Duh, no brainer. However, I don't think we'll be seeing big or small Battlefield this time around. For the sake of streamlining, I kinda hope that every stage will have multiple variants to choose from. The default, Battlefield, Omega, Small, and Big. I don't know if that's an insane amount of work, but I do like the optional variants and find the listed alternatives to Battlefield kinda silly. After that, we have 3 returning stages from Mario: Mushroom Kingdom, representing classic Mario; Luigi's Mansion, upgraded to better represent modern Luigi's Mansion vibes, maybe even changing to The Last Resort; and Paper Mario. I also think Paper Mario could stand for a redesign, maybe focusing on Thousand Year Door and incorporating the Paper Theater. Let's get the Mario adjacent franchises out of the way too. From Donkey Kong, we'll be seeing Jungle Japes to represent the classic DK House, and New Donk City. Technically, that's a straight up Mario stage, but I think we can revamp it to fit Pauline and DK from Bonanza. If not, just find ways to make it rep both franchises. Yoshi brings us Yoshi's Island from Brawl, update it to Mysterious Books vibe, but mostly staying the same, and Wario brings us WarioWare Inc., best encompassing WarioWare's minigames. If you want it, you could update that for the new entries as well. Regardless, I see that as more likely than a Wario Land stage. Moving away from Mario, Legend of Zelda also returns with 3 stages: Temple, Melee's truly uncuttable classic repping old school Zelda; Bridge of Eldin, Brawl's representation of midlife Zelda; and Pirate Ship, repping the toon aesthetic. I do think that if you wanted to shift priority to the N64 games, you could pick an Ocarina or Majora stage over Bridge of Eldin. Honestly, you could even have both Twilight Princess and N64 representation. So much of Zelda rep has been dominated by the Wild era that new stages get a little dicey, so I think it's okay for Zelda to get more returners. I'll stick to 3 for now though. Let's cover the rest of the 64 crew. Metroid has Brinstar, best covering Metroid 1 and Super, as well as Frigate Orpheon representing Prime. Kirby comes in with 3. Dreamland, another classic from 64, keeping Wispy prominent; Fountain of Dreams, another one far too classic and relevant; and Halberd, a unique stage that not only represents Meta Knight, but also kinda Brawl itself, with the Halberd's relevancy in Subspace Emissary. Star Fox only keeps its most iconic stage, Corneria. Pokemon only keeps 2, but don't worry, there's plenty of content to pull new stages from. For now, it gets Pokemon Stadium for the classic vibe, and Prism Tower, revamped for Legend ZA a bit, but mostly kept the same. Mother also keeps 2 stages: On It, Melee's home for Ness, and New Pork City, a larger chaotic stage that covers Lucas and Porky. And lastly, F-Zero keeps 2. Big Blue, a hazardous stage with the higher detail X and GX vehicles, and Mute City SNES, helping cover 2 of the most iconic tracks as well as repping older F-Zero and 99. Now the Melee and Brawl franchises. 3 for Fire Emblem. Castle Siege, a nice generic Fire Emblem stage that's malleable for any fighter; Arena Ferox as an awakening stage; and Garrick Mach Monastery. I don't like this stage very much, but it's important representation for Fire Emblem's newer heights in popularity. I'd like them to make it a bit more interesting this time around though, or pick something else from 3 houses. Ice Climbers keeps Summit, Game & Watch keeps Flat Zone X, Kid Icarus keeps Reset Bomb Factory, not really needing 3 stages and choosing its most popular and latest entry to represent. If not that, I'd think I'd like a new stage that better covers the totality of the franchise. Sonic comes back with Green Hill Zone, obviously they'll never let that be removed, and Pikmin only keeps Garden of Hope, as Distant Planet never really spoke to me as a Pikmin stage. And let's round out the newer Smash's returners. Animal Crossing keeps Smashville, good older Animal Crossing coverage. Mega Man naturally naturally keeps Wily Castle. Punch-Out also naturally keeps Boxing Ring because it's not only perfect for him, but for Smash even without him. The Mii's get Tomodachi Life, relevantly reworked for Living the Dream and generally covering Mii's well, and Woohoo Island representing Wii Sports. I could see Woohoo Island getting cut for lack of relevance, but Wii Sports was absolutely massive, so why not keep it? Xenoblade keeps both rep stages, Gower Plain and Cloud Sea of All Rest. Duck Hunt has, well, Duck Hunt. It's basically more relevant representation than the fighter. And Street Fighter, Final Fantasy VII, Bayonetta, Castlevania, Dragon Quest, Fatal Fury, ARMS, and Minecraft all keep their entries. Of them, I wouldn't mind them making Dracula's Castle a more compelling, larger stage. That brings us to a total of 48 returning stages under the traditional continuation approach. Now let's get into some new content. These are the stages that I feel very confident about making their way into the next Smash, regardless of approach. Mario gets 3. Flower Kingdom, a moving stage that reps Wonder and becomes the new Mario scrolling stage, Mario Bros. Circuit coming from Mario Kart World and replacing 8th stage, and Sparkle Theater representing Showtime and giving Peach a new home stage. 2 notes here. Instead of Mario Bros. Circuit, you could do Dino Dino Jungle or Gray Question Block Ruins, though I think Circuit best fits World's aesthetic. And Sparkle Theater could have a fun mechanic of choosing to inhabit a certain role for a short time, changing your moveset to match a theme. Maybe they would just keep Peach's Castle though, but it's hard to not give Mario a million stages. Donkey Kong of course gets a new stage from Bonanza with Ingot Isle, focusing on destructible terrain. It could instead be Canyon Lair or Planet Core though, depending on vibes. Legend of Zelda gets Great Sky Island from Tears of the Kingdom, a larger stage with a fun floating layout and using some of the game's mechanics. This is mostly a placeholder for some new Wild Era stage because I don't like Great Plateau Tower. It's boring. Metroid gets Artaria from Metroid Dread, showing off the caverns as well as Emmy zones, because honestly, no matter the newcomer, I think representing the Mercury's Team games is a no-brainer. Kirby brings in Wondaria from Forgotten Land, Pokemon gets 3 new stages like Mario. Winden Stadium, essentially acting as Pokemon Stadium 3 and covering Gen 8, Area 0, a spiritual successor to the League stages or Spear Pillar and representing Gen 9, and Obsidian Fieldlands, representing Legends. That's kinda also just a placeholder for a Legend stage. Maybe there's better options. I don't know. I don't play the games. That disclaimer kinda goes for half of these, honestly. Meanwhile, Fire Emblem gets something from Fortune's Weave. Absolutely no clue what it is yet, but that's where it's coming from. Sonic gets Starfall Islands to replace Windy Hill and cover Frontiers, though I could see an Adventure 2 stage instead. Pikmin gets Heroes Hideaway, a very natural addition considering their new emphasis on Pikmin in human environments and Pikmin 4. This kind of replaces Living Room too. Animal Crossing gets Smash Island, a replacement for Tortimer Island that stands in as New Horizons representation. Pac-Man gets Pac-Maze 2, bringing back the tragically abandoned Pac-Maze 3DS and replacing the god-awful Pac-Land. Xenoblade gets Serene Square, or, you know, whatever from that game. And Splatoon gets Scorch Gorge, replacing Moray Towers because it sucks, and better matching Splatoon's current vibe. With all that said, this approach safely gets us 65 stages. It sounds like a lot, but it still puts us way short of Ultimate, giving us room to grow. However, there are 10 stages that I'm less confident in but love the idea of. It might bloat certain franchises, but I think they cover some really great ground. Mario, once again, has 3 to consider. The first is Starship Mario, essentially replacing Mario Galaxy by combining it with Odyssey in what they both always should have been: a traveling stage. By using the ship, we can visit locations from both games, while also somewhat representing the movies. It could also prove as a technical showcase, boasting about how many zones there are to travel to. Option 2 is Bowser's Castle, finally giving the big guy a home that's been weirdly lacking. And option 3 is Rainbow Road, replacing Mario Circuit as a Mario Kart stage while giving us something much more dynamic and representative of all Mario Kart's grandest moments. DK could follow the footsteps of a villainous home base by bringing in Gangplank Galleon for K-Rool. For The Legend of Zelda, there were a couple locales that I really wanted to represent as mainstays of the franchise, while also bringing in an art style more like the Grezzo games. My main pick for this is Ancient Woods to give us the Great Deku Tree, but we could also go with Death Mountain to shift focus to Ocarina of Time. Metroid could give us Volt Forge with tons of moving platforms and dangerous lightning. Again, newcomers aside, they could choose to do this to rep Prime 4, and I think think they'd pick this over Chrono Tower. Yoshi could get a second stage in Crafted World to further implement its arts and crafts style. Based off of Air Riders, Kirby could get City Trial. Something allowing Sakurai to represent Air Ride would be amazing, and it could kind of replace Great Cave Offensive, while also almost acting like Smash Run in its stage gimmicks. If we didn't want to skip over Engage, Fire Emblem could give us Ring Chamber, also helping to show off Fire Emblem history with stage appearances from characters. And lastly, Splatoon could get another stage in the form of Salmonid's Smoke Yard, helping to give us a different vibe of Splatoon stage and implementing Salmon Run's horde of enemies. Could be Jam and Salmon Junction instead. Same difference. If blessed with that much content, this would really flesh out the franchises as much as possible. And there would be even more on the way, but we're gonna step away for now and get back to talking about the next game as a whole. So we've taken the safe route by limiting roster cuts, bringing back a lot of content, and keeping modes and movesets fairly tame to accommodate. Now let's start to get risky. This is the other hot topic revolving around Smash 6. Instead of trying to call upon Ultimate's impressive legacy, Smash 6 could try to give us a fresh outlook. Maybe to keep Ultimate unique, keep development manageable, and even for Sakurai to train up a replacement lead, we could see a Smash that takes a lot of elements and brings them back to square one, finding new angles for fighters, new mechanics, and the freedom to explore more intensive new modes. This next approach is exactly what fans have been talking about in opposition to a Switch 2 edition or a safer sequel. It's time for a fresh start. Plenty of characters have outdated designs, we've already focused on small tweaks to gameplay and big guest characters while becoming locked out of options because of roster size. It's time to cut down, refresh, and see what Smash really looks like in the modern age. This approach really only has two downsides. A smaller roster, meaning that fan favorites and hoped for newcomers are less likely to appear, and a lack of familiarity, which may alienate some players that look for more or less the same core experience when getting a new entry to the series. Change is scary. I feel that those are small prices to pay to free up a world of possibilities though. Plus my main is never getting cut, so I'll be fine. The benefits of a fresh start are abundant. For one, we can obviously take all the cool things from the less risky options and host them here too. New fighters and stages, refreshed movesets, more stadium modes, a roguelike, and adventure mode. But speaking of adventure mode, while they could still go with the smaller team routes of the traditional approach, a smaller roster would absolutely open back up the possibilities for a larger scale, cutscene heavy story mode like Subspace. We can get full cohesion and crossover between the whole roster and expand upon gameplay in a massive world to traverse instead of picking from a world map. In this case, I don't think we'd have to stick to the whole Taboo's Revenge type of thing. It'd be really cool to get new original villains with a bit more presence and motivation, and get crossover villains involved like before, whether they be playable or just bosses. Now let's talk about the hottest topic, fighters and movesets. Again, not doing specifics yet, but it's kind of hard to avoid with the reset approach. In order to free up Smash's options and make sure development isn't a hellish slog just so we can get some new stuff, we have to cut the roster. It's a scientific fact. While I think we'd still be losing some veterans with the traditional approach, with a reset we'd be cutting down the roster by about half. While Ultimate was focused on long-time requests and covering as much ground as possible, Smash 6 should take on a new direction of tightening the roster closer to the absolute essentials, which I can't talk about yet. By doing this, we get to take a look at every character's moveset and feel, refine what works, and take a sledgehammer to what doesn't. This is the approach that fully allows us to revamp movesets. Smash 64 and Melee fighters, the majority are getting a complete makeover. As you get to the newer fighters that still have a more modern Smash design philosophy, I don't think we'll need quite an overhaul, mostly some tweaks, maybe a fresh special or something. However, we can make sure that everyone gets attention by implementing new mechanics. Now, this starts to push the envelope the most in terms of alienating fans who will be distanced by too many changes. No matter what, in this approach, any changes or additions to the movesets will keep the core of Smash in mind. A party game platform brawler with a much more accessible control scheme than typical fighting games. I've already mentioned the tag team concept, and I think that could be one approach that would emphasize the crossovers. It could be even further emphasized by giving teammates combo moves, melding together abilities, and attacks from sets of characters into wholly unique movesets. I think there'd be a lot of fun mixing and matching your team comp based on that. Speaking of big moves, I think Final Smashes could be looked at again. I'm not entirely sure what approach they take here, but I think the name of the game is making them more relevant to the core experience instead of an item or mechanic that many players will turn off. You could possibly treat them more like other fighting game supers and give each character a few options based on input. Maybe you take the idea of palette swaps and go crazy with it, combining the ideas of custom moves and echo fighters by changing a character's playstyle based on costume, representing even more of each fighter's appearances. Or you create some kind of mini auto combo system, like specials, but using 2 or 3 button inputs to add even more variety to every character's moveset. The costume and combos ideas both have some of the same issues. Some characters already stretch to completely fill out their movesets. Some characters aren't as old as others, meaning they have much less to draw from if movesets try to include both modern and retro moves, a concept I've seen float around a lot. Some characters' appearances vary so much that even with expansions to movesets and costumes, you still couldn't cover everything, singling out what is left out. Again, all of this depends on the roster of fighters though, and without discussing it, it's really difficult to, forget it, let's just do it. Now that we've covered a Switch 2 edition, a traditional sequel, and a reboot to the series, it's time to talk about who's staying, who's leaving, and who's joining for the first time. The reason I waited until now to do this is because we need to understand those as 3 main options in order to talk about a character's likelihood. There are some characters that are likely no matter what happens, while some are specifically benefited by one approach over another, so I didn't want to have to cover some characters a million times throughout the video when my thoughts on why they'd be included wouldn't change anyway. Because I'm totally and completely seriously trying to be as right as possible, I'll be covering characters' chances rather than saying definitively who will and won't be in. Furthermore, characters have varying levels of chances based on the approach. Like I said, some characters are probable no matter what, while others are most likely in the traditional or reset approaches. I also just want to put a disclaimer that I understand developing semi-clones and echo fighters is much easier than completely distinct fighters, and so cutting an echo does not equal making space for a newcomer. I get that, I've internalized that, they're still extremely cuttable to me. Cutting them surely still helps to some extent, and I'd like them to find ways to build upon palette swaps to take their place. I'm making these rosters based on very ideal conditions, focusing on unique, exciting newcomers. Besides, clones and echoes frequently come about during development anyway, when it's a fun and easy way to add more characters, so I find them to be basically unpredictable. I'm sure you could bring back any echo or clone I cut, and it wouldn't move the needle too much on other characters. So with that explained, it's time to get into it. First things first, who is coming back and who are we leaving behind? Well, for the Switch 2 edition, obviously everyone is staying. As for the others, just like stages, let's break this down by series as described by the website. Mario, Luigi, Peach, Bowser, and Rosalina are absolutely not going anywhere. Rosalina is technically less likely, but with the movie and her puppeteer moveset, she's too important and too distinct. Bowser Jr. is likely going to stay as well, but I do think he's cuttable. He's staying on the traditional roster, but I could see him removed in a reset to give a mechanized moveset to someone else, and to make more space. As for cuts, Doc, Daisy, and Plant are out of here. To be perfectly honest, I'm tired of Doc. He's such a weird spot on the roster, and if you're excusing him as a puzzle game rep, then there's so many better options. Hell, there's even better options for another Mario, so he's gone. Daisy could very easily be a costume unless they went all out with a more sporty moveset, which I don't think they will, and Plant is a really fun character that was mostly just a good gag pick for Ultimate. Again, we're trying to keep the most vital elements here, and a random mob from Mario ain't it. Donkey Kong keeps everybody. Good for them. I see K. Rool as substantially more removable than DK or Diddy, but with recent developments, I can't really see a reason to remove him. Zelda, on the other hand, gets axed in half. We obviously keep the trio, who are all 100%ers. Sheik and Toon Link are both probably in a traditional sequel, but I do find both of them kinda expendable. If removed, Sheik's moveset can be placed elsewhere, and Toon Link is kinda dated as an alternate version of Link at this point. Though, let me talk about Link for a second. Link and the Zelda series as a whole is in a strange place with the recent games. The Grezzo games were well received, but didn't really move the needle in terms of cementing a new style in the minds of gamers. The Wild games absolutely did, but that starts to limit what the characters can do in Smash if they lean into that too hard, and we are now leaving that era behind. If I had to bet, I think we're going to return to Green Tunic Link to represent as much of the franchise as possible, while Zelda will more heavily draw from her magic and moves from the Wild and Age of games. And Ganondorf will pull from all his boss appearances while looking like Tears of the Kingdom Dwarf. If the movie promo shot is anything to go by, I feel somewhat confident in this. Oh, and Young Link is getting cut. No surprise there. If they do have Link stay in Wild mode, Toon Link will carry on the classic Link legacy, if not replaced by some other alternate version of Link. Metroid is also getting split, keeping only Samus and Ridley. I love Metroid, we don't need Zero Suit or Dark Samus. If you upgrade palette swaps, Dark Samus can go there, still with some unique animations. ZSS is mostly getting cut because we don't need two Samuses, and we now have new, actually good Metroid reps to add. Yoshi is absolutely staying, especially with how much importance he seems to have within Nintendo. Kirby makes it through unscathed with all three fighters, Sakurai is not touching them, and Star Fox. So I had recorded this whole section like a month ago, and then this happened. And then this happened. So suffice to say, my opinions on Star Fox as a franchise have changed pretty drastically since I wrote this script. My original concept was basically that Star Fox was going to be kind of moved to a retro spot on the Smash roster because it just wasn't relevant enough to warrant being its own staple franchise in Smash anymore. Well, that has absolutely changed. However, my fighter picks for the next Smash do actually still stay the same. I think Fox is on no matter what now. He is definitely 100% going to be on any roster Smash puts together. Falco is only in a traditional approach. He'll be there as a representation of his importance to Smash as a whole over the years, but you don't really need two of mostly the same moveset from a franchise that still isn't that massive at this point. And because of that, Wolf is getting cut. If we don't need two of the same moveset, we don't need three of... I know there's differences, but I mean, they're semi-clones. Fox has two semi-clones. He doesn't need two. So yeah, Fox is on every roster. Falco's on the traditional roster, and I don't think they would really even change him all that much. Again, he is there just for that alternative to Fox's play style, and he's a beloved character, but in a smaller cut-down roster, you really only need Fox, or you can combine Team Star Fox into one slot, like they had originally considered. Drop my fucking phone. Then we get to Pokemon, which is a really weird one. For one, it's one that I don't have much personal stake in, so maybe my reads on some things will be wrong. But more so, with the Pokemon on the roster now, it could kind of go either way. Nearly everyone has their place in their own way, and I could see them returning, or it could be an absolute bloodbath to whittle things down. In my opinion, the four most likely not to go anywhere are Pikachu, duh, Pokemon Trainer, Lucario, and Greninja. Pokemon Trainer is too cool and representative to move away from, and as far as I can tell, Lucario and Greninja are extremely popular and aren't going anywhere. You might notice that I didn't mention one really big Smash name here. Jigglypuff is one of the most curious cases of Smash 6. Of the originals, Jigglypuff has already almost gotten cut. Realistically, do we still need Puff on the roster? Not really. So I think that a traditional approach would keep the core 12 for old time's sake, while a reboot would use this opportunity to finally remove her. Somewhat similarly, Mewtwo is a massively popular Pokemon who's been around a while, but look, we gotta make room somewhere, and both Pikachu and Trainer already rep Gen 1. Again, in a safe roster, he's there. In a shake-up roster, he's gone. Meanwhile, Pichu is obviously getting cut, as is Incineroar, who has plenty of moveset uniqueness, but will be making way for other Pokemon newcomers. Speaking of Jigglypuff, let's talk about Ness and Captain Falcon, rounding out the 64 crew. Captain Falcon isn't going anywhere. He's too linked to Smash at this point, and F-Zero is shockingly relevant with 99 and GX on NSO. Ness and Earthbound, I'm more conflicted about. They are not relevant. I think Lucas is straight getting cut because we don't need this moveset on the roster basically twice. But something interesting to keep in mind is that Lucas almost replaced Ness in Brawl. Like Jigglypuff, Ness is not so entrenched that he's unremovable, even to Sakurai. And so, like Jigglypuff, a traditional approach will see Ness return, but I can actually see a world where he gets cut. I'm not very confident in that stance. I think even in a reset, we could see him on the roster because he is cool and unique. But in a world where Smash essentially refreshes the original 12, do I really see Nest there? No. Keeping that hate mail coming in steadily, I also don't see the Ice Climbers as locks. Yeah, it was exciting for them to show up in Ultimate, and they only got cut for tech limitations before, but again, it's a matter of relevance here. Even among retro franchises, is Ice Climbers really something people are clamoring for? The nail in their coffin is that I could actually see someone else taking the duo fighter concept. So with that in mind, traditional keeps the Ice Climbers, reset removes them. Now we reach the most divisive franchise on the roster, Fire Emblem. I actually don't have any maybes here, just straight keepers and cuts. The cuts are Lucina, Corrin, and Chrom. We don't need 3 awakening characters and 2 clones, and Corrin's just fine. Mostly just a casualty of slimming down the roster. That leaves us with 4 fighters. Marth representing the classic era, Ike the 2000s, Robin Fire Emblem's first major surge in widespread popularity, and Byleth, face of the Switch era and Fire Emblem's biggest game. This keeps us with unique movesets, different playstyles, and room to grow. Mr. Game & Watch stays, another classic character tied to Smash at this point. Then, like Star Fox, Kid Icarus gets 1 in each camp. Pit is staying because he's Sakurai's son and doubles as retro rep. Palutena, I feel pretty confident saying will stick around, but if Kid Icarus isn't going to return anytime soon, I could see them treating Pit like that kind of archival Nintendo spot, cutting Palutena. And Dark Pit gets hit with the clone cut, another perfect costume opportunity. Finishing Brawl while skipping the third parties, Wario stays, Olimar stays, and Rob stays. That last one is apparently a hot take at this point, but I think Rob is incredibly iconic to Nintendo's rise in popularity. He has a cool moveset, he's been used to this day, and he also has ties to Smash with his role in Subspace. He's staying. That's one of my bolder predictions, I guess. Both Animal Crossing reps are staying. AC is too huge now, but I'd like to see more differences. Wii Fit is getting cut, no question in my mind. You'll see why soon. Here's my other bold prediction. Little Mac is absolutely staying. I know he's almost universally seen as a terrible fighter, but you have to separate that from the role he plays. He is the #1 fighting guy for Nintendo as a whole, and acts as important retro representation. He also gets mentioned in tons of different ways. Could they rework him to make him not dog water? Absolutely, but he's not getting cut. Get real. I think the Miis are staying, though for one main reason. Costumes sell. Mii costumes are a great form of representation without a ton of dev time, and I'm sure are profitable for the bigger ones. I do think it's possible they'll change how it works though. Instead of the 3, in a more drastic change, they could just make it one Mii fighter, with different styles and more intensive customization to mix and match and really embody a character of your choosing. And to wrap up the first parties, Xenoblade keeps both, Duck Hunt gets cut in a reset, Inkwing stays, and Min Min gets cut in a reset unless ARMS 2 comes out of the blue. Now for the third parties. Arguably, this is where things get bloodiest and most controversial. I tried to consider a balance of the character's relevance, the company's involvement, the genre or era they represent, and their overall presence on the roster. Sonic 100% stays, he's popular, Sega and Nintendo are close, and Sonic is very nearly a Nintendo character at this point. On the other hand of Brawl, Snake is getting cut. I foresee this as more of a rights and company decision than anything else, with Konami not really caring and Sakurai not having the connections to a friend or obligations to Ultimate. Plus, that's another moveset that I think is going to get transplanted, at least in spirit. Most of the Smash 4 third parties actually stay. Mega Man is a great Capcom rep that counts as Nintendo Retro and has a new game coming on the way. Pac-Man is the property of the company making Smash, so yeah. Ryu is one of the faces of fighting games, though Ken is getting the clone cut. And Cloud is the face of RPGs, Square has much better relations with Nintendo now, and Final Fantasy VII has been having a big moment with the new games. Covering the rest of that franchise, as well as the last of the Smash 4 third parties though, Sephiroth and Bayonetta are both maybes to me. Sephiroth is really cool to have on the roster, but in a slimmed down lineup, I don't know if he's so essential as to be the only third party with dual representation. And while I'm sure there's no issues getting Bayonetta to stay on the roster, I just kind of feel like her moment has passed. Like Snake, Sakurai's personal connection no longer exists, and the franchise has kind of withered after mixed reception to the newest games. Again, in a leaner roster, I could see her removal to make way for others. As for Ultimate, we start to talk about a game of ratios here. Brawl only had 6% of its roster as third party, though it was a new concept there. Smash 4 only upped that to 10%, while Ultimate doubled it, moving to 21%. On the whole, I see third parties as being the most likely to be cut, and therefore that puts a lot of Ultimate's newcomers at risk. I only see two characters as sure things, Simon and Terry. Simon acts as Konami's rep, the series is relevant, and the games are important to gaming as a whole. Terry may not be as big a face to fighting games as some others, but SNK has immense importance and influence to Sakurai personally, and SNK content in Ultimate was bursting at the seams. I think Sakurai wants SNK there, and SNK really wants to be there. A traditional approach lets us keep a few more alongside Bayonetta and Sephiroth. Hero stays on as the face of one of the most explosively popular RPGs in history, though I think Erdrick takes over as the main face. And Steve returns to represent the biggest game in history. Steve was probably the character I've gone back and forth on the most. Yes, Microsoft keeping representation in Smash is probably a great move, but with everything changing in the industry landscape, I have no idea how Nintendo-Microsoft relationships are gonna go. I also don't know if any of these companies will explicitly withhold for DLC, and Steve himself is controversial because of the competitive scene. I could absolutely see the argument for Steve being a 100% lock or being an easy Western cut. Therefore, he's a strong maybe, likely in a traditional roster to keep his hype, removed in a reset roster to avoid his complications. Well, I say I was most conflicted about Steve, but these last four all really threw me for a loop. Joker, Banjo, Kazuya, and Sora. Again, strong arguments for all of them, but I just get this vibe that they're not coming back. Persona is still pretty big right now, but something about Joker, I don't know. I don't see him as necessary on the roster, especially compared to other third parties. Banjo was such a long time request that his arrival in Ultimate makes it feel like that was his moment, and now the moment has passed. In a new game not focused on those kinds of requests, I don't know if Microsoft sees as much incentive to let him be there. Kazuya is arguably a bigger face to fighting games than Terry with his representation of Tekken, but well, I don't know, cuts have to come from somewhere. He's my least confident cut of all of them, but I see it happening for whatever reason. And with Sora, kinda similar to Banjo. Yes, he was the most requested newcomer of all time, but we now have a Smash with Sora in it. That game's never going away, and people can still buy Sora for that game. In my opinion, there's no way Square puts Sora back in the game, especially compared to the Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest characters. So here's what my traditional returner roster looks like, here's my reset return roster, and here's the graveyards of both. In the reset roster, we also get less stages, as the homes of Hero and Bayonetta get scrapped. Just because these characters got cut doesn't mean they can't still substantially be in the game though. For one, anyone could come back as an assist trophy, sticking with their most iconic moves. But I could also see Smash expanding on the concept of the stage boss with a gimmick called Stage Fighters. To keep representation alive while limiting development and roster size, certain characters could appear as hazardous fighters on stage, still maintaining a chunk of their moveset. For example, if Ness were to get cut, he could absolutely still appear on it, or we could keep Spring Stadium, having Min Min jump in and join the fray, or Summit to let Ice Climbers fight again. But at last, now we can top this off. Let's cover newcomers. We've already spent a lot of time on characters we already know about, so let's jump right in with some fresh faces. To start, let's cover the Switch 2 edition. As I said, this would be a chunkier Fighters Pass, providing 7 newcomers with only one third party. These are my safest bets for newcomers in every iteration of Smash 6, though 2 of the franchise's reps could be swapped out for someone else in certain contexts. First up, we have predictable. Yeah, I don't see any way that this doesn't happen, especially for Ultimate, which feels like it's all about serving hopes and expectations. We round out the Dreamland 4 stack, we get a Spear Fighter, we don't need a new stage, it's perfect. Somewhat similarly, I've tried my hardest to learn nothing about Xenoblade, but this seems like a popular choice to fill out that trilogy's representation. With this, Xenoblade would essentially have who it needs. Now to some characters who long missed their chance because of timing. This is really a Smash speculator greatest hits here, but come on, it's perfect. A great flashy moveset from a new iteration of Pokemon while finally giving Smash fans that grass starter they've wanted. And finally giving us a Metroid rep besides a Samus or Ridley, Ravenbeak. His playstyle could represent the Mercury Steam games, much faster and more aggressive than Samus's current Smash playstyle. He's a character that I could see being swapped out in certain versions of the new Smash though. Just like... Especially if they start to lean away from Ultimate's decisions, I still think they'll want to fully represent the Wild games in some way. They're just too massively successful and influential for Nintendo. Plus, he has plenty to pull from for a unique moveset, he's not part of the trio, and he's a named character throughout the series. As for our last first-party ad, we get a completely new face. This is the pick I'm most confident about of literally anything in this video. Ring Fit Trainee will be in Smash. Not a doubt in my mind, especially as a replacement for Wii Fit in the future. Plus, as a newcomer, they'd come with a stage, probably Beginia. I have a moveset video that talks about it more, as I do for Ravenbeak. And lastly, that third-party newcomer, also from a new franchise. A Nintendo exclusive FromSoft game? Come on now, that's a sign if I've ever seen one. Though, speaking of, this is really just a placeholder spot. It could be the Tarnish to rep the massively popular Elden Ring, coming with a Lendel stage, or it could be a rep from Dark Souls, or even Duskbloods. To me, with the Elden Ring port, Tarnish seems most likely. Going into my traditional roster, we have a roster of 83 with a quarter of it as third parties. Our 7 Switch 2 Edition picks make up part of that, especially since movesets of veterans don't change too much in this version. That leaves us with 15 more newcomers to discuss. More Fire Emblem is an inevitability, and while we don't know who from Fortune's Weave will cross over yet, Kai seems like a good bet at the moment. I find Kai to be more likely than Alear because of the passing time since Engage, as well as its positive but somewhat mixed reception, and the fact that Alear seems to focus on other Fire Emblem characters that are already in Smash. Alear could just be a stage fighter on Ring Chamber. Either way, neither move my stage numbers. Look, I do not want this at all. I hate this concept, I hate this dog, I do not like Pikmin 4. But Nintendo and fans love this dog, and Pikmin 4 was very well received. I will say that I can see how Ochi could expand the roster with a fresh design and moveset while helping to fill in the current gaps of Pikmin representation. This is kind of a weird one. Again, the idea of the Pokemon Trainer is great to show Pokemon's core battling and is unique in Smash. However, I acknowledge that having 2 would basically mean developing 6 characters. I have some thoughts on that. For one, they could just leave the current trainer basically untouched to minimize the workload. The other option I see is keeping Charizard and replacing the trainer with a new one that helps to spread out gen coverage. I mostly see this happening on the reset roster, as we then get a fire starter, water starter, grass starter, and a trainer. I could see that happening to traditional trainer 2 though. As for the trainer 2 and their loadout, I'm not sure. I imagine this as Legends representation using one of those trios, but it could also be a popular trainer from a game that would expand more upon the types of Pokemon in Smash. This is about as expected as Bandana Waddle Dee, and yeah, Splatoon is massive and there's enough weapons to go around for 2 characters. I could see this instead going to a duo or trio of the announcers, using their signature weapons and adding more showmanship, maybe even replacing Ice Climbers, but realistically, Octoling is easier and safer. Filling out Mario's playable 4 in a similar spot to Bandana Waddle Dee, Toad has a lot to pull from for a brand new moveset that shows off another iconic Mario character. I don't personally find Toad that interesting, but I think in a game that is still keeping a lot of squads together, Toad makes sense. And our final first-party newcomer for the traditional roster is another new franchise. Rhythm Heaven's finally getting a new game. We know that Rhythm Heaven has been considered before. In the past, it was specifically the Chorus Kids, but most people use Karate Joe as kind of a Rhythm Heaven placeholder. As I've recently gained some Rhythm Heaven experience myself, I can safely say that I have no clue who is best. It could be the girl instead. But in general, this would be a great place to put a fighter that uses a music or rhythm mechanic, adding a whole new way to Smash. I also see him coming with a stage that acts like WarioWare's, having players play rhythm minigames. As for third parties, let's cover a couple second editions. Highly requested, possibility for being unique while easy to develop, has some spotlight right now. I can't see why not. For this Sonic choice, I picked Radical Highway from Adventure 2 as his home stage. One of gaming's most iconic female characters who plays a good bit differently from Ryu, replacing Ken. She comes with a city environment called Metro City, though it could be called Bustling Downtown or Shopping District instead. And not quite a returner, but a series very present in Ultimate. Monster Hunter is huge and is already in Smash with Rathalos. A fighter wielding a giant sword would be sick, as would a stage like Shrine Ruins with monsters spawning in. Though Monster Hunter isn't Capcom's biggest franchise. Here's another bold prediction I feel strongly about. Snake gets cut. But, what's this? Another realistic man that uses realistic weapons and melee combat? How convenient. I think Leon will basically take Snake's spot on the roster, not pulling from his moveset directly, but having the same playstyle, and coming with Raccoon City Police Department as his stage. Plus, watching the RE games over the last few years and fans' reactions, both companies must want to make this happen. And like all the games are on Switch, it's gonna happen. Speaking of consistent collaborators, Koei Tecmo works non-stop with Nintendo nowadays. I've always been shocked that they haven't gotten Ryu Hayabusa into Smash in any form, not even a Mii costume. A traditional sequel feels like the perfect time and place to make that happen, almost feeling like a straggler from Ultimate's mission statement. He'd come with Hayabusa Village as his home stage. We may have given up Kazuya, but it's time to show off a newer face of fighting games. It'd be cool to get Arxis and Guilty Gear in Smash, showing off new fighting game mechanics and coming with Large Canyon. I don't see him as that important for a smaller roster though, just like Hayabusa, so they're both traditional roster exclusives. And finally, a Smash first with 2 indie fighters. I'm pretty sure Toby Fox and Sakurai are BFFs at this point. While many suspect a Deltarune rep would be chosen, and yes, it is massively popular, nothing is as popular as Sans. Representing the fantastic phenomenon Undertale and coming with the traveling underground stage, Toby Fox getting Sans in as a full playable fighter just feels right to me. As for the other indie, look, I don't think Nintendo could go for all these years without seeing the Silksong comments under every single thing they'd ever stream or post, and I'm sure Silksong did numbers on Switch too. This is definitely a personal pick for me, and I could very well see only Sans getting in as an indie, but the Knight would be a perfect fit. I could also see Hornet coming in instead, depending on the company's preferences. Honestly, it's 50-50 who they'd pick, so the Knight is more or less a placeholder. The Knight would come with a City of Tears or Coliseum of full stage, while Hornet would come with the Citadel. So here's what my final traditional roster would look like, and here's its stage list. Pokemon, Mario, Zelda, and Fire Emblem all maintain the most reps. Now let's slice things down and talk about the Reset roster. While traditional carried on with some Ultimate mentality, Reset considers that some moveset tropes have become available for other characters, like Snakes going to Leon. All but 2 of the Switch 2 edition additions come back, save Rauru and Ravenbeak. That's because those 2 are getting swapped out for other franchise representatives. In my Reset roster, losing Sheik puts the Sheikah Ninja moveset back on the table, and a lack of Rauru means that there's plenty to draw from the Age of games too. On top of that, if Link stays away from his champion design, she can keep the Sheikah magic too. With that and the Zelda movie in mind, I could see Impa taking her role as the official popular 4th of the Zelda franchise. As for Metroid, I cannot believe that my first moveset ever is actually plausible for Smash now. Well, not the moveset, that sucks, but the character. In my mind, the Reset Samus gains a faster, more agile playstyle. She was never a slow character in the 2D games, so I don't really know why that's what she became in Smash. And the Mercury Steam games give her a really definitive presence. To keep the tankier Prime feel though, Sylux could take on some attributes of classic Samus while still bringing in his own moves from Prime 4. Meanwhile, here are our returning fighters from the traditional approach. As stated, we're losing Hayabusa and Bad Guy, but we're also swapping out 2 other fighters. While Toad may be the 4th of the good guy crew, Geno has been requested forever. Despite those requests, for a long time I didn't see it happening. But after the Mario RPG remake, and with the Reset's loss of Sephiroth, Hero, and Sora, I think this would be a great moment for Square to finally have Geno join, along with a Start Hill stage. And our other trade is a third-party one. I find Eggman much more interesting than Shadow. Both would be really cool, but I don't see that happening. I think Eggman is such an iconic villain and could have a really unique playstyle. I see him as somewhat taking Bowser Jr.'s spot with his own spin on mech-based fighter, and instead of Radical Highway, his stage would be Space Colony Arc. Beyond those, though, I find the newcomers for both traditional and Reset to be fairly similar. There's 3 less newcomers total, and only 2 we haven't covered so far. Yes, a third indie entry may be unlikely, but that gap between indies and major studios has narrowed drastically over the years. I think it's silly to say that Undertale, Hollow Knight, and Hades aren't popular and acclaimed enough to earn spots, even without the good rapport that Nintendo and Supergiant clearly have. Zagreus could be a really interesting fighter and embodiment of the roguelike genre, as I covered in a moveset, coming with a stage called Hades to represent the games. And I do think it'd still be Zagreus over Melanoe. And our last newcomer newcomer is a Smash original. I think it's finally time to take full control of Master Hand, not through a cheat or in a limited capacity. His moveset would come incredibly easy, he's iconic to Smash, and it would give reason to create an all-new final boss for the game, if they don't reuse Taboo in some way. And with that, here's my final reset roster. And here are the stages. The major franchise representation mostly stays the same, but evens out a little bit, and third-party rep drops a tad. And just for one extra, if they really wanted to slim things down, here is what I consider to be the absolute bare minimum roster Smash can have to stay Smash, though I don't think they'd go this hard. My personal most wanted newcomers would be a Metroid rep, Ring Fit trainee, a FromSoft rep, and any of the indie reps I mentioned, but I really wouldn't have problems with any of them. Besides OG. Again though, I'm trying to make sure that something I say winds up in the real Smash 6, and there's so many franchises and characters left to talk about, so I want to do a roundup of other possibilities. I'll go through the franchises in alphabetical order. A pretty popular request, Mr. Wright just doesn't speak to me. I really envision him as a Mii costume more than anything. I don't really think there's a universe where this happens, but Sakurai does know about Among Us. I think it's totally possible to get an imposter or crewmate Mii costume or an Among Us stage in the form of the Skeld, which would have crewmates roaming around with one as the dangerous imposter. A lot of people seem to believe it's necessary to have more AC representation on the roster because of how big it is. I think if they could, they would, but I just don't see the potential. I think making Villager and Isabelle more distinct is all well and good, but don't really buy into what Tom Nook could add as a third rep. If anything, maybe he'd be more of a joke character, but I'm not putting my faith in that. Would be cool, but I think the time has well passed for this. Mii costume or assist trophy feels right though. Maybe I'm completely underestimating Bomberman's pull, but I'm surprised how many people I see bring him up. He got the costume in Ultimate, sure, but I don't know. Again, I don't see it. I think the Mii costume stays. Very cool character, and in a world without Richter would spread out the iconography of Castlevania in a cool way, but I don't really see a second unique Castlevania rep happening. Crash is probably the major request held over from Ultimate, and there is a world where he makes it in, especially in a bigger roster like my traditional one. I'd be surprised if he got in any form though. I think Sakurai's adult matters will get in the way somehow. The only reason I really humored this is because Sakurai is seemingly close with the creator. Beyond that, maybe a trophy or sticker or something. Like I said, I personally find Sans and Undertale's chances higher at this moment. He's just more iconic. I wouldn't be surprised to see Deltarune get in somehow though, whether it's taking advantage of the stage to combine both Undertale and Deltarune, music, Mii costumes, or something else. I kind of feel the same about Dante as I do aspects of Crash and Bomberman. He's a big name, lots of demand, has precedent in Smash, but I think his time has passed without enough relevance in modern games. Could see the Mii costume returning, or maybe an assist trophy. I actually have a really weird theory about Dixie. Diddy and Dixie are usually shown together at this point. In the world of a reset roster, I think Ice Climbers could get cut to make Diddy and Dixie the new duo fighter, with the mechanic to switch who is in the lead and slightly alter the moveset. This is my prophecy. You know how I talked about my most wanteds earlier? Well, technically Doomslayer still tops that list. Would I love to see it? Yes. Do I think an FPS moveset should be in Smash? Yes. But I'm still only giving him a 50-50 shot for a few reasons. Yeah, he already got a costume and he's important to gaming, but Doom is tricky to put into Smash and has somewhat faded from gaming culture compared to Doom 2016 through Eternal. Plus, I don't want to get my hopes up. Actually, skipping ahead, I feel basically the same about both of these. They could be the Nintendo retro pick, and both function as a new mounted fighter archetype. But nah, don't really see it. Maybe Excitebike over Mach though. I've already talked at length about this, but to reiterate, while Jones and Fortnite can earn their spot on the roster, I don't find Jones very interesting as a possible fighter. I could totally see a standalone Reality Zero stage come to Smash to represent Fortnite as a whole. No real chance at all, but again, I kind of looked at who Sakurai is close with, so, you know. Microsoft has been weirdly absent from Nintendo in the Switch 2 era besides some Bethesda ports, and with the changes in leadership, I don't know where that leaves things. I was already surprised that Halo got no representation in Ultimate. I could see it happening. Despite Halo's decline in popularity, Master Chief is still a really cool iconic character, but I still believe he's less likely than Doomslayer. A slept-on series for sure, but I don't see the moveset potential. Instead, I think an assist trophy would be hilarious, rolling around collecting everything around the stage, including fighters. If not, a Mii costume is fine. I never saw this as likely, especially considering Waddle Dee, but with him having copy, I think Gooey could be a cute moveset to represent the actual copy abilities from Kirby, not needing to copy other fighters. Still unlikely. I only really put him here because he's a big Metroid character, but I don't see newcomer potential. They could rework the Brinstar stage to include him though, since Brinstar Depths is getting cut. Mortal Kombat is another massive fighting game, so I could see an argument for him getting in over Soul and Guilty Gear, but I have a gut feeling Sakurai doesn't really care about Mortal Kombat, and it's a really tough property to include, similar to Doom. Color swapping Ninja Mii costumes would be sick though. A big request and seat at the Sakurai table, but another one that I feel kinda missed the timeline. A sleeper pick for sure though. Switch Sports is shockingly well selling, and it'd be fun to incorporate an all sports moveset. I don't like the design though, and don't think it's very necessary. Covering my other Pokemon considerations, these three fall short for one reason or another. The Gen 8 electric types will probably get skipped in favor of Gen 9 and leaving electricity to Pikachu, but you never know. With Eevee, I actually think a form or stance evolution change would be sweet as a moveset, and it is very popular, but I don't know why they'd pick another Gen 1 Pokemon. This one is extremely recent, so recent that I haven't actually even scripted this out. I'm just making this up as I go along. But Pokopia was kind of surprisingly a smash hit, to the point where I could see Ditto getting in. I do think there's a lot of stuff getting in the way though. I think having a moveset focus on building would step on Steve's square nubs a little bit. If Steve was removed, it would make a little more room, but then it kind of stops feeling like Pokemon representation. There's a couple ways Ditto can go. You could have things like Cut and Rock Smash be smash attacks and have some really weird thing with the specials. I could see Ditto representing moves from all throughout the Pokemon franchise, or maybe something where Ditto copies specific moves and chooses where to place them in its specials. A different take from Kirby on a clone character. Still, I don't really see this happening, especially if the new Smash is already in development. And jumping back a little, both of these characters serve to introduce a puzzle moveset to the game. Arl, Puyo Puyo Tetris, Lip, Panel de Pon. Actually, one more jump in the alphabet. If you're gonna represent Tetris, why not go all in, right? Well, each of these three has their issues. Arl and Lip both suffer a little in terms of recognizability. Lip is first party, which helps, but Tetris is far more iconic, giving Arl an edge if she utilized that. And Tetramino, I've seen cool concepts and it could be a great joke character, but I think it's more likely they'd give Tetris abilities to, you know, an actual character to use. That would seemingly put Arl on top, and I do think she is most likely, but still not very likely and would be divisive. Above all, I feel that a Tetris stage is what's going to happen, and that would absolutely slap. Once upon a time, I would say Rayman is a shoo-in. Now, I don't see it at all. A Mii costume without arms would be great, maybe an assist, but with Smash 4 and Ultimate in the rear view, the time has come and gone. Not gonna happen. I just want a Rocket League assist trophy with RC-sized cars. That'd be fun. Again, once upon a time, Shantae was one of the indie picks, and she still has a lot of potential. I just think they'll go a different direction, just like with arguably even more iconic and got an assist trophy, but I think that or a Mii costume is as far as things go. Shovel Knight as a brand does still keep striving forward, so like 2B, I could see Shovel Knight as a sleeper pick. Much more likely than Scorpion, could be argued more important than Soul to represent Soul Calibur, and is a Bamco game. Yet again, I was surprised to not see anything Soul Calibur in Ultimate, and that fills me with doubt. If Monster Hunter gets in with a giant sword, I think his chances are gone. Awesome Mii costume though. Mentioned this a bit already, I could see Paper Mario replacing Doc as a secondary Mario, but I think Geno serves to cover Mario RPGs well enough, and I don't love same name characters on the roster. Could totally see it though. This is my forming alliance of actually maybe fighters that I won't put on my roster. Speaking of Mario, I personally love Kamek as a newcomer, being able to use really fun magic attacks and tricks, but there's a long line of Mario characters vying for the spot that beat him out. Including, yes, I get it, I know the meme, I know the demand, sure, it's possible, but look deep within yourself. Over Toad? Over maintaining the Mario Cast's current large roster footprint? I think Waluigi is the permanent joke of Smash. His assist trophy will be displayed for all to see like a flogging in the town square. Oh, speaking of characters people think are locks for Smash 6, no. I love her. She's getting really popular. She's a great cross between Mario and DK. That doesn't mean anything for Smash. I think her moveset potential is nebulous at best, currently a weird mishmash from over the years. Unless she's with DK, which I feel would be a big misstep, I don't see it happening. And our last Mario Jason entry, King Boo probably has the least support of all of these. It's a shame. I think all of them have good moveset potential, but I don't really see the need. I'd love this. Monkey Ball is super cool. It's not happening. Hopefully an assist trophy or stage or something. Master Hand is so iconic that if anything Smash Original were to join the roster, I think it's him. Taboo is sick and would work great, but if he has a role in a roguelike mode, that'd make things harder, and in general is not very likely. I could totally see a subspace stage that warps to different locations of the Brawl campaign though, in which Taboo would be a stage boss. That would be great. Actually, in terms of characters appearing on stages, Takamaru seems to be the retro pick most people stand behind, and he'd probably be pretty cool, but I don't really see a reason for the inclusion, and he's been shot down by Sakurai before. I think a cool compromise would be a mysterious Morisami Castle stage, in which Takamaru is a stage fighter. With that, I think these 4 stages would be cool additions, and I'm adding them to my stage lists. That is how I see the rosters and content of Smash 6 panning out. But there's still some video left. Everything up to this point has been me talking about the Smash we all picture in our heads, the platform fighting juggernaut. But what if, in an effort to try something new and stray away from Ultimate, we get something a little different? Earlier, I brought up some potential mechanical changes that Smash could implement, things that would expand the gameplay while keeping the overall shape of Smash intact. I also covered newcomers going off the basic template they've always used. What if they weren't so conservative? What if they kept Smash Bros. A fighting game, but took things in an entirely different direction, whether that be in its roster or its subgenre? In this approach, Smash explores various game-changing mechanics, layouts, and stylistic alterations to create something entirely new. Let's start with an example. When you think of fighting games, Smash might not be the first image that comes to mind. Instead, the standard 2D fighting game is a timeless classic. It'd be really cool to see Sakurai take on this fundamental format with his years of experience and passion. This opens up a lot of possibilities. In terms of character design, we could not only see a fresh aesthetic, but I don't think the lack of platforming would diminish the Smash style too much. The air dashing style of some fighting games would be a worthy supplement. A 2D style also allows for a more expressive, true representation of characters, especially when it comes to their size. We can get small characters like Little Mac and Olimar alongside giants like Ridley and K. Rool, and scaling wouldn't be as much of an issue. To top it off, this kind of drastic shift could act as a series reset, reprioritizing to match the Nintendo of today and bringing in new locales and modes. Unfortunately, there are drawbacks to this approach. Even if it was an air dasher, this format does inherently take away from some of the appeal and potential wackiness that Smash is known and loved for. It also means a smaller roster and less newcomers to accommodate for the big shift in development, something that would bum most fans out. More than anything though, my main concern is that it would defeat the point of Smash's simplicity. Sakurai wanted to make Smash as fundamental and accessible as possible, not based around combos that completely exclude new players. This would be the biggest hurdle with the traditional 2D Smash. I think Sakurai could work around it, but I'm not positive. There are also a bunch of directional overhauls that wouldn't be so dependent on a stylistic change. These next 3 suggestions could be platform fighters, 2D air dashers, or something more like a beat 'em up. There are also some that I've seen floating around the Smash scene. The first is a focus on franchise teams. Each franchise gets 4 representatives that essentially work as a team, whether that's just in adventure or classic modes, or with the tag team mechanic. Other characters from the franchise get moved to supporting roles like assist trophies, final smashes, or bosses. Here's my roster for that. You'll notice very quickly that this creates plenty of issues. Certain franchises really have to stretch for a team, so some classic Smash fighters would either be stuck in some miscellaneous team or scrapped altogether. This also kind of screws over villains, and while some franchises feel like they could have an unlockable all bad guys team, that then feels kind of rude to other franchises. Overall, this kind of tag team franchise franchise concept doesn't really work for me. Something that works a little bit more for me is the concept of a Smash game that emphasizes assists. Here's what I mean. Right now, there's a large gap between playable fighters and other forms of representation. What if there was a secondary tier of fighter inclusion? Something that feels really faithful and representative and allows for more characters, but maybe means a slimmer core roster. You could get a roster somewhere between my Reset and Extreme Cut selections that's clearly missing a lot of key characters, but add them in a way that serves to support the main fighters. Think of it like equipping 4 additional specials for your chosen fighter. You have your core moveset, but you also have slots for assist characters. Those characters each only have 4 possible moves, 1 for each direction. Depending on your preference, you assign them where you see fit, and boom, suddenly you're Mario fighting with the powers of King Boo, Garchomp, KK Slider, and Shovel Knight. Realistically, this would probably be insanely divisive and disappointing for fans of certain characters, and it wouldn't make the whole legal rights business any easier. But I do see it as a fun new way to get in a ton of characters without trying to top Ultimate's roster. The last of the 3 concepts I've seen floating around is Nintendo versus the world. Essentially, first-party characters taking on characters from all of third-party gaming, with a roster evenly split to match. This is one of the most brutally cut rosters, really scaling things down to the most important characters of each franchise, which would already cause fan turmoil. Notably, Nintendo only gets Ring Fit as a newcomer, all third-party vets return, and a huge swath of the third-party newcomers I suggested make it in. I see the appeal in a thing like this, but why would they do this? This kind of feels like shooting their best form of free advertising and first-party glorification in the foot. Guests are a big part of Smash now, sure, but I do think a split roster like this would uproot Smash a bit too much. If I had to pick one of these, I'd pick the assists concept, but I don't really like any of them more than a 2D fighter. That leaves me with one more type of fighting game to talk about. While it's by no means a popular genre, I think an arena fighter would still perfectly encapsulate the feel of Smash characters while still providing a whole new experience. To clarify, I mean the isometric diorama style of games like Custom Robo, Power Stone, and of course, Tom and Jerry and Fists of Furry. The great thing about a Smash Arena fighter is that spacing, speed, and height are maintained as key elements of the battle. Your controls and moveset get to stay similar enough, but translate it into a 3D environment. It also, pun intended, smashes open stage design, allowing for even more creativity in layout, items, and environmental interactions. There's so many iconic gaming arenas that translate perfectly into this format. This is my favorite choice for a Smash that changes fighting subgenre, but probably not anyone else's. It can't be understated that this is just not a relevant type of fighting game for casuals or the competitive scene. The roster would also need to take a big hit to address the shift in design. Those things combined is a sure way to make sure one of Nintendo's best sellers doesn't make the money it should. The name and concept alone will still draw in many, but it certainly alienates others. So, we get an expansion upon Ultimate, a standard sequel, a reboot, and a shake-up to the type of fighting game Smash is. I think that covers a massive amount of possibilities for what they could do. Still, I don't think that's enough. I think there are even more out there options that they might not ever consider, but if they did, I'd be the madman to predict them. Up until now, we've still only talked about Smash as a fighting game. It's no secret that Sakurai considers Ultimate a pinnacle and culmination of the series as it is, and he himself has doubts about how it could possibly continue. What if it kinda doesn't? Nintendo will never let Smash fully rest. Why would they? They'd be stupid. But what if Sakurai wants to try something really new? What if the next game called Smash isn't a fighting game, only utilizing the concept of crossovers as its core identity? This lets Sakurai experiment and not have the franchise grow stale, and opens up entire realms of possibilities. The idea of Smash Kart has been talked about to death. That's not what I mean. Combat is still going to be a focus, just in very different ways. For example, maybe it's finally time to take Smash into a full 3-dimensional open world, because goddamn everything else is. With some kind of plot about universes colliding and needing to defeat some existential threat, the worlds of our Smash icons could combine into an action-adventure game similar to Breath of the Wild or Dark Souls. This would be a good bit more single-player focused, and for the sake of imagination, I'll use my return of taboo concepts for the story. I picture there being a big hub area with a generic Smash design and a mix of Smash original enemies and corrupted foes from various franchises. From there, you would cross into the Mushroom Kingdom, Hyrule, PNF for 404, and more, with smaller challenge or minigame pockets of smaller series. This is the roster I'd go with, the most stripped down one yet, with only Pokemon really cheesing their way in by using a Pokemon trainer equipped with 6 iconic Pokemon like the ones we see in Smash now. Other characters would be enemies, bosses that maybe you can unlock, helpful NPCs, or even mounts like Mario riding Yoshi. The gameplay and new control scheme would be one of the toughest points of conversion in this new style, and I do have some thoughts about how it would work. While the world itself is more reminiscent of open world games, when picking a fight, it would actually play like a cross between those games and something like Tekken, Soul Calibur, or Dragon Ball Z. You'd lock onto your opponent and the camera would shift a bit to take on an altered view, again combining the adventure and fighting game genres. In my mind, the control scheme would be something like this. 3 of your 4 face buttons would all be different attacks or chains of attacks, allowing you to mix up your inputs for combos and different strikes. By holding down another button, these 3 buttons then activate your specials. More, well, specialized, like they are in Smash now. If we wanted to compensate for cutting the roster so much, if summons or assists were a thing, they could get a dedicated button as well, and you could customize who goes in that slot. Speaking of customization, this format also lends for a ton of room to level up and change moves that each fighter has. This could be as simple as swapping out what your specials are, or we could even have different styles that a fighter could switch between based on their various incarnations. Mario could have 64, Sunshine, Odyssey, 3D World. Link could use the toolkit of the Hero of Time, Wind, the Wild. You get the idea. To me, the most exciting elements of this concept are the fresh style and the possible move variety. It's always exciting to see how Smash translate characters from their home games, and doing that same work in the most freeing form of gameplay possible would be so cool. Like the Arena Fighter, it also lets us expand upon the worlds just as much as the characters, with massive fleshed out sections dedicated to the franchises. It could easily still have multiplayer, with smaller chunks of zones used as arenas in what would still ostensibly act like a fighting game. And the amount of dynamic, iconic, and unique specials each fighter could use would even outdo Smash as is, justifying this seismic shift. But of course, this comes with downsides. There'd definitely be naysayers about any kind of abandonment of Smash's roots, especially for a format that is all but overdone in the modern age of gaming. You'd lose out on a ton of characters in the roster, some who couldn't even work in this view, and DLC would be more difficult to work in. And with so much emphasis on the franchises included as a whole, I'm sure approvals and legal matters would be the sour, terrible icing on the cake. I shouldn't even need to say this, but of course I don't think this will happen. I don't find it even remotely likely, but it is fun to start to consider what the title of Smash could mean in the future. With that, there's only one other wildcard approach to touch on. This is another concept I've seen thrown around here and there, and in some ways, it's both better and worse than the open world idea. This would take Smash into the world of the turn-based RPG, with all the trappings that entails. Traversing a large world, running into enemies, dramatic story and dialogue, and building and upgrading your team. I imagine the plot would be fairly similar to my concepts before, linking together worlds due to some major threat, though with maybe more of an emphasis on an original big bad and enemies, so we can still have series villains on our side. For the record, by the way, I totally think a new Smash game could use a free roam top-down world map like an RPG, but when you zoom into a fight, it takes place on a Smash stage. They were already halfway there with World of Light, and I could totally see it happening for, like, the Reset Approach's big story mode. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Let's go over some pros and cons. The biggest pro, at least to my common gamer eyes, is the ease of development. With turn-based combat, this is arguably the easiest game to develop in this whole video. Each character would need something like one basic attack and then a list of specials, with set animations and targeting systems. I think this simplicity allows for a few things, one being ways to expand the RPG genre. If games have done this before, don't kill me, I haven't played many RPGs. I like the concept of the range and height of moves playing more of a role, having some characters airborne but able to be taken out by ranged fighters, dangerous close-range sword fighters held back by someone like Min Min, stuff like that. Like the 2D fighting game, it also allows for size to play a fun new role. Large-scale bosses can stay large-scale, and maybe they have an entirely different playstyle. Maybe they only attack once every 2 turns, but their turns are powerful game changers. I would also absolutely utilize the timing mechanic mechanics of things like the Mario spin-offs and, more recently, Clair Obscur. Me costume potential, by the way. The final major benefit of Smash RPG is the potential roster size. With simpler designs, the roster could theoretically be huge, representing more of each franchise than ever before. You could even include more standard mobs and minions, and maybe have them play some lesser role, some kind of simple auto-attacking soldiers for you to have on your team. In this case, you would still have a core set of 10 or so characters be the main characters who are leading the team. Or you could have a smaller roster, but give even more characters plot relevance. Either way could work. Unfortunately, there are drawbacks though. Sticking to this discussion about characters, I think either approach could kinda turn into the wrong one. With a massive roster, you get tons of representation and unique movesets, but very few of them would actually feel tied to the game, kind of just becoming accessories. On the other hand, RPGs are carried by connections formed to the story and characters. If you have a 20 character roster with each character highly engaged into a deep story, scratch that, I'm not even gonna say if. It wouldn't happen. I do not believe we would get something genuinely meaningful in this format, whether that be due to character representation rules or the overall concept. Cut even more characters for a better story and it stops being Smash. On top of that, I think the idea of Smash RPG would maybe be the most alienating. At least with Smash World, you would still get to see competitive players going at it in flashy, dramatic showdowns. Yes, I know there are competitive turn-based tournaments, but to argue these two things have the same effect on the average onlooker is delusional. This would very much be a game for fans of the concept of Smash, not necessarily casual or hardcore gamers, or even fans of the Smash games so far. This is definitely a concept that appeals to the itch of seeing these characters cross over into different styles and how their abilities would be converted. Still, with the possible ease of development and the possibility of the truest form of crossover, with the characters' personalities along with their fighting styles being fully shown off, there's a lot to love about this idea. And that, finally, is all of my hopes, expectations, and predictions for the next Smash. If a new Smash comes out and I get literally none of this right, I'm deleting my channel, I swear to God. Really though, Smash 6 is a hell of a chestnut, and I do not envy Sakurai or whoever is making it. Ultimate in many ways represented the Switch and future of Nintendo. Their franchise is at the best they've ever been, with plenty of big names getting the love and appreciation they deserve. What will Smash 6 say about the Switch 2 and Nintendo's future now? Will it show Nintendo continuing to top themselves, taking big swings, and proving that their creativity never runs dry? Or will we see issues that are arising in some of their games? A lack of exploration of ideas, cutting back content, and repetition? Only time will tell. As for any other kinds of predictions about Smash 6, it's tough to say. I'm not even gonna try to guess a name. Sure, I have Smash World and Smash RPG, but for any of the more normal approaches, it could be anything. I remember spending so much time spitballing names of Smash Ultimate with friends, and I truly don't think we ever said Ultimate. In terms of release window, let's look at some trends. Melee was 2 years after 64, Brawl was over 6 years after Melee, Smash 4 another 6 years after Brawl, and Ultimate 4 years after Smash 4. If we include the end of Ultimate's DLC in October 2021, that puts us at over 4 years since the end of Ultimate, coming up on 5. But there's another timeline to look at here. Melee released mere months after the GameCube dropped, Brawl was a little over a year after the Wii, Smash 4 was 2 to 3 years depending on which console you look at, and Ultimate was a year and a half after the Switch. Putting all that together, statistically, with 5 years out from Ultimate and 1 year out from the Switch 2, we might hear about this game in 2026, but it doesn't come out until mid to late 2027. Now, whenever we play this kind of game, Nintendo loves to prove us wrong. It could show up in the next Direct and come later this year. It could be a 2029 game. I think it's worth keeping an eye on the horizon, but don't get too excited just yet. And if I had to rank my expectations of which approach they take, here they are. Maybe this is a hot take, but a reset feels like the approach Sakurai would be most interested in while keeping Nintendo and fans happy with what Smash is at its core. After that, I could totally see a Switch 2 edition coming out or starting its rollout this year, and the traditional sequel would come out slightly faster than a reset, maybe, depending on roster size. Other than that, none of the rest of these are very likely, though the new subgenre approach is more likely than the other two. I'd say the RPG is the least likely because it's the least like Smash. Even with an open world game, Sakurai has experience making characters run around in a 3D space. I could see him taking lessons from Air Riders and transferring them to Smash. Again, there's lots of hangups with these two approaches though. And that's all for now. Which approach do you want? What newcomers and franchises do you want added to Smash? When do you think it's coming out? Let me know in the comments. I'll mostly be waiting for things to happen and slowing down a bit. I'll do streams of Nintendo Directs, follow-up videos once we get news about Smash, and further analysis of My Chemical Romance based on their shows this year. So until next time, thank you so much for watching.